We are facing a recovery that could turn out to be one step forward and two steps backward. And you ask why? Because much of what cushioned the blow for the current budget will no longer be available when the legislature meets in January 2011 and tries to balance the budget for the next biennium. On the revenue side, we will be challenged by the loss of federal stimulus dollars and the exhaustion of the rainy day fund. The Education Stabilization Fund is close to tapped out, and federal county payments will soon run out too. On the expenditure side, inflation, population growth, and unfunded mandates, especially ballot measures that grow our prison population, are all keeping rising costs ahead of rising revenue. Because of persistent unemployment, many of our citizens who never thought they need government assistance are now turning to our social safety net for help. That means hundreds of millions of dollars more for Medicaid, emergency aid for families in crisis, food assistance, and unemployment insurance. Public employees' retirement costs will also go up because state and local governments have to backfill losses sustained in the recessionary stock market. And then there is the kicker. Oregon's one-of-a-kind debit card that makes it impossible for the state consistently to put money aside in good times to help us weather the bad times. So while we are striding toward recovery, we are also speeding toward a budgetary cliff. Simply put, time is of the essence. The legislature must act in 2011 to avert a decade of deficits. If they don't, we will end up damaging Oregon's engines of economic growth: education, transportation, healthcare, cultural tourism, research, and energy. What do we have to do to prevent a decade of deficit? Let me start by telling you what will not work. First, relying on temporary fixes that hide the real structural problems in our budget. And second, believing that all we need is a short-term vision that does little more than help us survive the next revenue forecast. Today, the starting point for every new state budget is this question: how much more revenue do we need to provide the same level of services in the next biennium that we did in the current biennium? Anytime you start by asking, how much revenue do we need, the answer always has been more. That's why the first step toward keeping the decade of deficits at bay is to dial back the starting point to, in fact, create a new current service level. That is what I call the reset. The reset won't be done with the county gimmicks or by executive fiat. It will require changing how we finance and deliver services, and it will require the political will to make those changes. The reset comes in three parts. The first is the need to stabilize revenues. Oregon has a very unstable revenue system, and it is getting more volatile with each recession. Our income tax funds most of what state government does. In good times, the tax revenues flow in, often in an amount that exceeds the state economist's most thoughtful and best predictions. In bad times, corporate and individual income tax receipts shrink by hundreds of millions of dollars. We must stabilize state revenues. The second part of the reset is to attract as much revenue as possible from outside sources. In budget jargon, these are called other funds. The largest share of other funds comes from the federal government, but they also include dedicated taxes raised for a specific purpose and private funding from business and universities working in partnership with state government. The third part of the reset is reducing state spending, delivering services more efficiently, investing less in some government functions, and eliminating or consolidating programs, agencies, and boards. since 2003, we've been finding ways to cut the size and cost of government. Everything from a smaller workforce to more fuel-efficient cars to creating a business permit system that is faster, simpler, and doesn't make your average business owner's head explode. But we will be required, and I think this is the most important point, we will be required to do even more in the next decade. The Reset Cabinet, a collaboration of public and private citizens, have been looking at the structure and funding of state government since last September and will deliver their recommendations to me in June. I mentioned that in 2007, we saved hundreds of millions of dollars by diverting the corporate kicker into the state's first rainy day fund. We did this with the support of the business community because they knew that the business of government supports the business of businesses. Businesses must have an educated workforce, a highly efficient transportation system, low-cost renewable energy and adequate water, a functioning court system to settle disputes between businesses, affordable health care, and a great quality of life for their employees. Together, these assets are the working capital of business, and Oregon has done a better job of providing for and protecting this working capital than any other state. Oregon's tax burden on businesses puts us in the bottom 5 of all 50 states, and our quality of life is absolutely second to none. Putting the corporate kicker into a rainy day fund and passing Measures 66 and 67 helped us through the worst of the recession and laid the groundwork for creating a stable, accountable, and predictable way for state government to raise the revenue it needs for the responsibilities it bears. But after laying the groundwork, we have to build the building itself. And building the building that will provide stability for Oregon's revenues and budget is kicker reform. The kicker, which is unique to Oregon, increases our cost of borrowing and is predicated on the false assumption that state revenues can be predicted accurately 2 years ahead of time. It's much like a weather forecaster on July 1, 2011, being asked to predict the temperature on January 1, 2013. And if you miss it by more than 2 degrees, we shoot you. Sorry, Tom. If we want to keep the brewing storm I mentioned safely offshore, fixing the kicker must be our top economic priority. I've been in politics for 4 decades. I understand political pressure. I understand what it means to cast a tough vote. I understand that raising money for a personal campaign becomes even more difficult when donations are siphoned off to pay for a ballot measure fight. It is time. It is time for us to do what is right, to see past the next election, and to put the long-term interest of the people of Oregon ahead of short-term political expediency.